Hi, my name is Julia Kline, and welcome back to my video series, Questions for Evaluating Sexual Assault. I am joined, as always, by my co-hosts and friends, Christine and Janice. And in today's episode, we are talking about redemption and forgiveness. And the three big questions that we want to address today are, number one, can you be forgiven once it's taken as a given that you have done a bad action? Second question, what is the path to redemption? And then the third question is, what is life like post-redemption? What are you expected to do, keep doing, after you sort of earned your way back into society? So with that very broad opening, where do we want to go with this to start, ladies?
You start.
Me start? Well, one of the things, first, certainly, that we have to take into consideration when we're talking about this question of redemption and forgiveness is criminal justice. And of course, some misbehaviors are criminal actions. And some of those result in criminal punishment. Bill Cosby is the one big headline case who has now been convicted in a court. Harvey Weinstein has criminal proceedings against him that are ongoing at this point. So certainly that does sometimes happen. Just a month or two ago, we all got to go through the Brett Kavanaugh Supreme Court hearing. And one of the big topics there was, well, if there's so much evidence that Dr. Christine Blasey Ford was, assaulted by him, how come she didn't press criminal charges? And so it begins to raise questions about, during the same period of time, the Washington Post published an expose about a woman in Texas, I believe, and whose name I can't remember, and I also don't have the journalist's name. But it was a woman who, as a teenager, was raped by the captain of the football team and the captain of the soccer team in her town. And that night, she went back to the house where the party was happening, and she told the mother of one of the kids what had happened to her. And basically, the mother either didn't believe her or chose to disregard it. And as the Washington Post described, things unfolded, and ultimately, the town turned against this girl. And even though it was brought to court, the boys were found innocent. And so a court of law declared them innocent, and I, based upon reading this Washington Post expose, feel that was a miscarriage of justice. It seems to me that they were really freaking guilty. Another example is John Gomeshi. He was it was criminally charged 4 years ago, I believe, with six different women charged him with criminal assault, and he was found innocent on all counts. And I believe that was a miscarriage of justice. I don't think that, and I think that we, the three of us, certainly agree that happens a lot.
Right.
That justice is not served often in a court. But there's the other example. The other problem with relying upon criminal justice is that often the things that are done that are bad, that are wrong, are not criminal offenses. A little bit of side boob grabbing in a photograph, and like, how long is the list of men that we've seen about in the headlines that have done that? From Al Franken to Ben Affleck, and I don't know who all else, right? Has been accused.
Didn't it just happen to Ariana Grande at some?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
was it
Aretha
Franklin
funeral?
Contribute?
Right.
Tribute.
And these are not things that anybody's ever going to be, criminally charged with.
Right. But they're worth discussing and pointing out.
For sure. And so the question is, and theoretically anyway, in our system of criminal justice, if you commit a crime and then you do your time, then you come out of jail and you get to go back to your life. And of course, our criminal justice system is fucked up, because if you get out of jail and you're branded as a felon, you have virtually no chance of being able to live a life. You can't get housing, you can't get a job. So our criminal justice system gives us a very bad example of redemption and forgiveness. Mm-hmm. People who have done their time for their crime don't get forgiven, and they are not allowed to be redeemed. So it's a very...
Well, a lot of them can't even vote.
That's absolutely right. In the state of Illinois, they can. Good job, Illinois. And now they can in Florida.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But a lot of them cannot, right. And another example, like Bill Cosby, he was convicted of these crimes. And a lot of people talked about, well, he's like an 85-year-old man, or however old he is. Like, really, we're going to send this blind 85-year-old man to prison? And a lot of people were like, fuck yeah. I mean, the only reason that he's 85 is because we didn't do this 30 years ago. Like, he should have been a 55-year-old man going to prison, first of all. But it brought to mind for me, well, if we decide to practice compassion and say he's an 85-year-old man, we don't want to lock him in prison, but he clearly cannot just be let off the hook, what else could happen? What are some other consequences?
Yeah.
And I came up with a long list. Maybe he is required to sit in counseling sessions with as many of the women he assaulted as want him to. Maybe he is required to donate X amount of money to a charity that is helping women to recover from sexual assault. Maybe he is required to go out on a speaking circuit and do a presentation every month for the rest of his life, talking about what he did that was wrong. I mean, I don't know. We can come up with other ways that you can forge a path towards redemption.
Well, I think you can only be potentially redeemed in any way, shape, or form is if you're willing to admit what you did.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's seriously the
first start.
gateway. That's
Yeah.
if they're not able to, if they're still like vehemently denying that this ever happened, like Kavanaugh and
John Gomeshi.
You know,
And Weinstein.
then it's like the conversation of like whether or not they can be let back into society or that they're forgiven, like that they're not even admitting it, like
Yeah.
that can't even start.
So I think that's a very big part of it, right? Is that first they have to admit that they did something wrong. So let's start our conversation with a couple of the examples that we know of men who are admitting their wrongdoing. And one that comes to mind is Louis C.K. He didn't deny anything that he was accused of. Another one is Al Franken. Al Franken, he made numerous statements, and he said, there's a couple of these things I'm accused of that I flat out deny, but there's a couple of them that, like, okay, let's talk about this. He said, I remember it a little bit differently, but, I'll take some responsibility for what I've done here. Can we think of any other examples, headline examples of men who really do say, I did something wrong?
You could maybe say Matt Lauer. Like, Matt Lauer he's denied certain portions of what he's been accused of, but he has said that there's truth to some of this. And, I mean, has kind of, like, retreated. Like, you don't see him anywhere, and everyone's kind of like...
Isn't he one of the ones that's trying to come back, though? Isn't he one of the ones that Charlie Rose wants to start interviewing?
Oh, I don't know.
And I thought that some network was talking about putting Matt
Who's
Lauer
going to
back
allow
on the air.
Charlie Rose to interview anybody?
Well, and this is part of why we're having this discussion,
Yeah.
right? Because these men, Charlie Rose, Matt Lauer, Louis C.K., John Gomeshi, Aziz Ansari, they all think that they should have their platforms back.
Go away.
Yeah.
You're done. Like, your careers. You had your career. You have your millions and bajillions of dollars to go live on your hilltop now.
Well, and that's what everyone's
let some
saying
other
about,
good people.
Yeah, that's what everyone's
interview.
saying about Matt, is that it's like, well, he's going to be fine. Like, he's fine. He, has made a lot of money. He can come back to society after, like, some time has passed. And it's like, there needs to be more done
Well, and
here.
who decides that, though? That's,
Right.
I mean,
And that's the question that we're trying to ask. And so what I
Yeah.
hear you saying is that, at least in some of these cases, there is no redemption. There is no forgiveness.
yeah. I mean, I think
You're done. You're gone.
Well, you know what? The career that you had, where you perpetrated these crimes or these assaults or whatever you want to call it. Some of them may be criminally prosecuted. Like, maybe the women chose not to do that. They want to just move on or whatever. But regardless of that, though, I think that your career in that industry is over. I'm sorry. I don't want to see Matt Lauer on TV interviewing. Who did he interview where he was kind of gross about?
If I'm not mistaken, he had a pretty appalling interview of Hillary Clinton.
No, but there's another actress. It was wasn't it Anna? Anyway, doesn't matter. But I just don't want to see him interviewing people. I don't want to see him on TV.
Right.
He can go start a nonprofit where he's going to pay for the therapy of abused women, or maybe he wants to pay for refugee relocation. I don't care really what it is, but it should be something
You should be giving
redeeming,
back to society.
giving back to society, to pay for what you've done in some way, shape, or form. So same thing with Charlie Rose. I don't want to see him interviewing anybody ever again. Like, get off. I don't want to see you on my TV
Ever.
Go redeem yourself in some way before you die. Sorry, like.
So, but it raises the question: what is so? It's my belief that Al Franken has changed his ways. Let's stipulate, for the sake of conversation, that 10 or 15 years ago, and maybe spanning that period, Al Franken still had the behaviors of an immature, ego-based comedian.
Yeah.
Sure.
And let's just stipulate that he did, as a matter of fact, put his hand on a couple of butts, grab a little side boob, in some photographs. And obviously, he did, in fact, put his hands hovered over Leanne Tweeden's breasts in that photo where she was pretending to be asleep. And let's just stipulate that she was, in fact, asleep. It's been asserted that she was not, that she was in on the joke. But let's just stipulate that he was taking advantage of a sleeping woman to crack a joke. Lousy things, right? But they're not rape. And despite Senator Kirsten Gillibrand's statement during the time when she was basically throwing him under the bus, that if we are having the conversation about the difference between butt groping and rape, we are having the wrong conversation, which was wrong of her. That's an inaccurate statement in my opinion, and she did a lot of damage by saying that, in my opinion. But so let's just stipulate that Al Franken did those things. But let's say 10 years ago, he had a come to Jesus moment. He had a big awakening. He realized, oh my God, that was just so wrong of me. I can never do that again. And he went through an internal process of dealing with whatever the stuff was that caused him to think that he could just put his hand on women's butts and that wasn't wrong. And he did all that stuff. And he got to be a senator. I personally want him to remain my senator. I would have loved to see him run for president in 2020. I think that Al Franken, in my opinion, completed the process of redemption, and I am willing to forgive him. I'm wondering, first of all, the two of you agree about Al Franken, but then does it change the equation if the things that were done were much more, like Matt Lauer was accused of essentially raping a woman, locking her in his office, bending her over a chair, penetrating her with his penis, and then having to the point that she passed out on the floor of his office. I mean, to my opinion, that's rape. So is that an action that no matter what he does, he cannot be redeemed for? And then it also begs the question, if that is in fact what he did, and if that's rape, well, shouldn't he be in jail? And if the woman doesn't want to press charges against him, do we as a society, should we say, we don't care that you don't want to press charges. He committed a criminal act, he should be thrown in jail. Because if you're in jail, you don't get to work in your chosen field. And then what about Louis C.K.? Louis C.K. essentially was accused of jacking off in front of a bunch of women. Not touching them, but just jacking off in front of them. So he's sort of a middle-of-the-road offender. And he's now already been redeemed, at least in the eyes of some comedy promoters. The guy that owns the Comedy Cellar in New York put him on stage 6 months ago and said, I'm not here to be the social arbiter, you know? What, we're going to let this guy, like, he's never allowed to be a comic ever again? And you're saying, no, he should not. But where do the three of us stand on that question? And does it matter if we're talking about butt groping and that the guy has gone through a process, or if we're talking about rape and the guy maybe or maybe has, because even if Matt Lauer says, yeah, I did it, is he sorry?
Right.
Has he gone through that process? Has he done the hard personal work? Or the middle example, Louis C.K., where he fully admits, like he's not trying to deny anything that he's been accused of, but he also has made a lot of public statements since then that indicate that he has absolutely done no work on himself. He might admit that what he did was factual, but I don't have any reason to believe that he won't do it again.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I think in Louis C.K.'s case, he should be in major therapy for a long time, and you know, to get to the root of why he would do such disgusting, perverted things, you know, and make, you know. But as far as like redemption is like, it's hard for like us to say as individuals, like when somebody is like, okay, they're redeemed now. Like, I mean, maybe Al Franken, maybe he's thought over the last many years about what had happened, and like, I'm not going to behave that way anymore, and I don't want to treat women that way anymore, and yeah, it wasn't that bad, but even it was just bad enough. I still just don't want to be that person. I want to change and grow. That's great, but how do we know he's done that? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I was going to say for Al Franken,
It's a good question. How do we know?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential for redemption here, and frankly, like I really politically, I would love to see him still active, like just for my own personal, you know, kind of efforts, but like.
And I would be saying the same thing if it was Marco Rubio. Not to say anything. I mean, like, you know, I'm sure. Like, I'm not making any accusations against Marco Rubio. I'm just saying that he is a person on the opposite side of the political aisle.
Right. But with Al Franken, like, I don't know. Like, personally, I can't think of outside of like his apology and like his kind of like recent kind of like Facebook posts where he says he's learning things like, and I don't know, I haven't seen him like speak on the Me Too movement. I haven't seen him make like a big donation to like, I don't know, any like female
He may have,
focus.
we may not know.
Yeah, we don't know.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. It's like, I haven't seen, I think there's certainly potential there, but we haven't seen it in like the 1 year time frame that this
Well,
occurred.
and my reason for believing that Al Franken is a changed man is specifically because of the statements that he made. Now, it's theoretically possible that he didn't write those himself and he just went along with some really clever staffer who wrote them for him. That's possible. But let's again stipulate that he wrote them himself and he did several of them because he was, if we recall, Leanne Tweeden was the first person who accused him, but then there were 7 more women over the period of about 3 weeks. So he kept coming out, and each one he made a statement about whether it was true or was not true.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, the statements that he made reflected an introspection and a depth of self-knowledge that you don't get to if you haven't gone through some personal reckoning with yourself around what you've done. So in my opinion, the statement it is the indication that he's done it.
I'm of the mindset that it requires more than words for actions like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like there should be some sort of action taking place where he is, kind of like full force advocating for, redeeming himself for his actions.
Well, but doesn't his actions as a legislator speak to that? I mean, as a senator, as a legislator, he has been a real, and I don't know at my fingertips specific things, but he's been a really strong and staunch advocate for women and women's rights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Yeah.
But the thing is like, that's his place of work. And I think to Janice's point where it's like, well, you've committed an act, your actions have set in motion a number of kind of consequences for you. And while, you are advocating for women's rights, and that's what I personally want too, I think there needs to be kind of like not behind the scenes, but off political landscape actions where he is advocating and essentially asking for forgiveness here
On his own time.
Yes,
Because we can also point out Eric Schneiderman, who was the Attorney General, I think, of the state of New York. I think Attorney General was his title. And he was ousted after Ronan Farrow and Jane Mayer. Jane Mayer and Ronan Farrow did an expose on Eric Schneiderman and the fact that 4, I think, lovers of his accused him of violent sexual behavior in the course of what would otherwise have been consensual sexual relations. And he resigned within like 3 hours of that article being published.
That's an interesting. I don't really know.
And he was an advocate for women's rights.
Yeah, I don't
for
know
sure.
a lot
He was
about
big, good, strong liberal.
I don't know a lot about the specifics of his case or whatever, but that is interesting because was his behavior in these consensual incidents of sexual behavior, like, is that criminal? Is what he did criminal? I mean, that's happening in the intimacy of the bedroom at your own private home. If the women, I'm just playing devil's advocate here. Like, if the women were consenting to having sex, and was it so violent that did they tell him to stop and he didn't stop? Like, and so therefore he was raping them? Or was it just like, I didn't like that afterwards? I don't know, like, because it's sometimes like when things are happening in people's bedrooms.
right.
Like, that's
the
their
situations
business.
where there's no criminal.
Yeah,
justice kind of
like
inserting
they may
themselves.
not like his sexual behavior,
Right.
and then you just don't have to sleep with him again.
Right.
Well,
I guess.
and
I
so
mean,
then pushing back on your push, or devil's advocating your devil's advocate.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what domestic abuse is, and 20 years ago, 50 years, I don't know, at some point in the past, there was no such thing as a wife accusing her husband of having raped her.
Right.
Because people said it's privacy of the bedroom and whatever. And that's not exactly what you're saying, but we could start to move in that direction.
I'm just trying to think of it from like different angles. Like this
Yeah.
guy, I don't even know, let's just not even say like an attorney general, some like random attorney general is accused of doing sexual things in his bedroom with consenting sexual partners. And then he loses his job.
Because what he was accused of is assaulting them in the course of sex, and he says exactly what you just said. He's like, it was just rough sex. It was just but he choked them and smacked them, and they both said, or 4 of them said collectively, that there was no discussion ahead of time that like, hey, wouldn't it be sexy if you kind of choked me while we were fucking?
Or you
Or
slap me.
Or that I would
yeah.
really love it if you would smack me so hard across the face it left a mark on my face.
Right.
No discussion of that. And in their opinion, and it came out of the blue.
Yeah, that is definitely.
Yeah, and so to your point, like he was taking actions in his professional life that certainly looked as though he was a strong, and his statement was, oh my God, I would never rape a woman, I would never do anything bad. But his perspective was that what he was doing was perfectly okay. And their perspective was, no, that's fucking sexual, or that's assault, that's physical
assault. Did any of these
assault.
women, I'm just curious, like, and it's not, doesn't matter if they did or not, but like, did any of them go to the police, like,
I don't
right
know.
after an incident like
I
this
don't
happened?
think so, but I'm not sure.
Okay, because, that's just interesting.
Yeah.
But let's just assume for the moment that they didn't. It raises the point about how criminal justice can't be this measure that we.
Well, especially if you're in a, well, I don't know. It's like maybe from a police perspective or a criminal justice perspective, like you're having consensual sex. But again, even if you're having consensual sex and you say no in the middle of it, if the person continues,
it's rape.
Yeah, then it
means
becomes
no.
rape. Like
Right.
if at any point you remove or withdraw consent, then it becomes
Right.
rape. So, but I don't think it's pretty clear that our criminal justice system is not at the same level as what really happens in real life. It's almost like too black and white and cut and dry, and that's not what real life is like.
Right. So, and that's the same thing with Gian Gomeshi, that he was similarly accused of having been physically assaultive within the context of consensual sexual relationships.
Yeah.
And it's also the brand new allegations that we have against Michael Avenatti, that he's been accused of domestic abuse by his current, or I guess now ex-girlfriend, right? That, basically they got into a big fight and she was sleeping in his bed, and we don't know exactly what all happened, but she's accusing him of calling her really nasty names and grabbing onto her wrist. Maybe he dragged her on the floor. Maybe, maybe he shoved her out the door and she bumped her head on the wall, and so I think it's possible to look at what has been reported as just a heated argument and get over it. And it's possible to look at it through the lens of, if that's not already assault, it's certainly gateway behavior,
Right.
to potentially becoming assault. Because we there was a story just a week ago of a shooting here in Chicago at Mercy Hospital. 4 people were killed because a jilted lover came to the hospital to kill his recent ex-fiance. And he had, prior to that, exhibited some of these aggressive, assaultive behaviors that are not too different from what Avenatti is accused of having done, and which I believe, I'm sure he screamed. I'm sure he called her some nasty names. I believe he might have even grabbed her wrist. She might have bumped her head, And again, that kind of stuff is what can so quickly elevate. But the question that we are still trying to address is, at what point do any of these men who are having, and let's just say that all of the stuff that we've even talked about, they're all guilty of all of it. Let's just stipulate that for the moment. Do any of them have a path to redemption?
Like I said, or like Christine said, there has to be some sort of actions being taken by them. If they're going to jail, fine, great, that's good,
Yeah.
But if they're not taking any action in their own personal life to make the world a better place in some way, shape, or form, then how can we say that they're could be redeemed or forgiven?
So a few minutes ago, you said that you don't ever want to see Matt Lauer or Charlie Rose ever again interviewing somebody. Can you imagine, is there anything that they could do to change your mind on that? Is there anything that they could?
No, I don't. I think the fair punishment is that you've lost your job, and I don't think anybody's going to hire them again to do that same exact role. Especially because that's where these behaviors happened. But they can do other things. I mean, they can start a nonprofit with your bajillions of dollars. Give out free scholarships to kids who need to go to college. I mean, there's so many different things they could do that I'd be like, great, yeah, go do that stuff. That's
and I think it goes on a case-by-case basis, because like Aziz Ansari, where, I mean, that was not as severe of an action as what Matt Lauer is accused of. He's trying to come back into comedy. I'm frankly okay with that. However, I would also like to see him, and this is a man who was kind of like quickly apologetic, and he did kind of blend back into the background for like a short time. I would personally like to see him speak more on behalf of the movement, because I think that truly shows redemption. Like, think of any time like you've done anything wrong and you really had to redeem yourself. You have to bring it up and fully show that, you know, you've had this change of heart, as opposed to just saying, okay, I'm sorry, can I like book my next comedy show and like and not bring it up again.
Yeah, 'cause I personally come down on the side of less harsh punishments, and saying, for example, like, you know, you need to be, you know, Matt Lauer or Charlie Rose, you know, you got to take 5 years or 1 year for every accusation against you, or something along, like, figure out a formula that makes sense. But without condemning and demonizing the man for life. Because specifically for what you said, like, if what we really want is for them to embrace a path of personal transformation, which involves taking responsibility, feeling remorse, taking actions to redeem themselves, well, the only way to, like, we have to help them get there. We as a society have to help them get there by saying, on the other side of it, there will be forgiveness. And so we're not just...
We can't guarantee that, though.
Why not?
Because we can't guarantee that society is going to forgive anybody collectively.
I mean, there's certainly going to be people who, like, you know, are always going to think that, like, well, he is a sex offender, or he is a sexual assaulter, and he always just will be.
But if we're fighting for the standard to become, I mean, of course, people will always disagree or whatever, but if we're fighting for the standard to become, these are the things that are expected of a proven sexual offender of some kind. And this is how he's supposed to demonstrate that he's gone through this process, whether it's by words, whether it's by actions. And then here's, like, you know, maybe there's one category of things he's no longer allowed to do. But everything else, like, he's fully redeemed. He's back into society, you know? He's done his time.
We're going to have to have another session on this specific topic, because there's too much to say.
There's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, there is.
There's a lot to unpack. I hope you've found this to be thought-provoking. There's no easy answers here. Please add a comment down below with whatever your reactions are, your questions are, and most of all, what you'd like us to address in the next episode of the show. Thank you very much. My name is Julia Kline. I'll see you again on the next video.